Clara Hartley had 3 days to find $47,000 or lose custody of her daughter to an abusive ex-boyfriend with police connections deep enough to make reports disappear into silence. When ruthless Korean Mafia boss Dante Moretti found her crying alone at 3:22 in the morning on a San Francisco curb, his reaction shocked the entire city. The humid August night clung to everything like wet fabric, the air thick enough to taste, distant thunder rolling through empty streets that had forgotten the sound of hope. She sat on concrete still warm from the day's heat, ash still floating in the sticky darkness, holding Lily wrapped in a borrowed blanket that smelled of smoke and loss. Her daughter was 6 years old and finally asleep, her small body curled against her mother's ribs like she was trying to disappear into safety. In Clara's other hand, a child's drawing. Lily had drawn their family with crayons the color of happiness, yellow sun, blue sky, 3 figures holding hands. The corners were singed black. The flames had taken the apartment. The flames had taken almost everything. She had exactly $2 in her pocket. 2. A $5 bill had paid for the blanket from a 24-hour bodega. Her phone had burned with the rest. Her keys, her driver's license, her last month's paycheck stub, all of it reduced to ash floating in the August air like the remains of a life that had been carefully dismantled by someone with money and no conscience. The footsteps came first. She didn't look up. Footsteps meant police, meant questions, meant losing those final $2 to a fine for loitering. But these footsteps were different. They moved with intention. With weight. With the kind of authority that made the humid air feel colder. A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The engine cut off. The door opened with a soft click of something expensive. And then a man stepped into the sulphurous glow of the streetlight, and the world tilted sideways. He was tall. 6'2", maybe 6'3", built like someone who had spent decades demanding obedience from his own body. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly it seemed to have been painted onto his shoulders and chest. The shirt beneath was white silk, unbuttoned at the collar, revealing skin bronzed by something other than sun, something deeper, something earned through decades of standing in rooms where violence was a language everyone spoke. His face was carved from stone. Angular. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and silver, the kind of mark that told a story of survival in places where most people did not survive. His eyes were dark. Not black, but the darkness of a sky before a storm, before lightning, before the world breaks open. His hair was dark too, with threads of silver at the temples, slicked back with the precision of someone who controlled every visible detail because the invisible details already controlled him. A gold watch caught the streetlight on his left wrist. Cartier. She knew this only because her ex-boyfriend Marcus had one just like it, a watch that cost more than she made in 4 months, a watch he showed to police officers and judges as proof that he was the kind of man worth believing. This man was different. The watch on his wrist was the same cost, but it sat there like it was nothing. Like he had stopped noticing luxury the way other people stop noticing the air they breathe. Like it had all become background noise to whatever lived in the spaces between his ribs. Carlo, his driver, stood 3 steps behind him, hand already moving toward his jacket where a gun hung like a second heartbeat. But Dante raised his hand, a small gesture, and Carlo's entire body went still. Waiting. Watching. Dante Moretti crouched down in front of Clara slowly. His movements were deliberate, each one controlled, the way a large predator moves around something fragile. He did not crouch the way normal people crouch. He moved like a general surveying a battlefield, like a man taking inventory of damage. "What is your name?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like the kind of sound that travels through concrete and rearranges the molecules of everything it touches. She couldn't speak. Tears had frozen on her cheeks in the thick heat. The borrowed blanket smelled like someone else's life, and her daughter was sleeping, and there were $2 in her pocket that would not feed them for a day, that would not keep them warm, that would not stop the courts from handing Lily to Marcus, from sending her 6-year-old daughter into a house where the walls were the color of bruises and the man who lived there had learned long ago that money could buy silence. "Clara," she whispered. Her voice was barely a whisper, shattered like glass. "My name is Clara Hartley." And the child? Lily. She's 6. He looked at the drawing in Clara's hand. The burned corners. The 3 figures holding hands. For a moment, something moved across his face, something ancient and broken and carefully sealed away. A muscle jumped in his jaw. His hand, which had closed on the wrist of a man and stopped his heart with a single squeeze 15 years ago, trembled. Just barely. Just enough that Carlo, watching from 3 steps back, felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Because in the 13 years Carlo had worked for Dante Moretti, in all the nights they had spent moving through the underworld of San Francisco like shadows with money and guns, he had never seen his boss's hand shake. Not once. Not in the room where Dmitry Volkov threatened to burn his businesses. Not in the hospital when he learned about his daughter. Not in the vault where millions sat waiting to be distributed. Never. But now, looking at a child's drawing with singed corners, Dante Moretti's hand trembled. "Come with me," he said. Clara looked up at him. Really looked at him. And in that moment she understood that she had just made eye contact with something that wore the shape of a man, but somewhere inside, something else lived. Something that had learned to walk and talk and wear expensive suits, but had never learned to be human in the way other humans understood the word. "I can't," she said. "I have nowhere to go. The building, it burned, and I have nowhere to go, and I have this drawing, and I have $2, and I have my daughter, and I don't know what to do." "You come with me," he repeated. His tone did not change. It was simply a fact. He was telling her the way the sun tells the earth what time it is. "The child sleeps." "Yes. She will sleep in a car. She will sleep in a bed. You will both sleep in safety." Something moved behind his eyes. Not kindness. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, like he was seeing something in her that nobody else could see, like he had spent 8 years looking for something and had finally found it reflected in the eyes of a woman crying on a curb with $2 and a burned drawing. "Why?" she asked. He did not answer. Instead, he stood, and in his standing there was such power that Carlo unconsciously took a step back. Dante removed his cashmere coat, the fabric so soft it had been woven for emperors and cost more than Clara had earned in a year, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like expensive cologne and something deeper. Something like home and danger mixed together. Because the people who did this believed you were nobody, Clara Hartley. And that belief is going to need correcting. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. What happened in the hours before Clara found herself on that curb, burning, desperate, with everything taken from her? Now let us go back 3 days earlier, when she was still fighting, still believing that the law might protect her, still unaware that mercy lived nowhere in the system she had put her faith in. The alarm on her phone screamed at 5:45 in the morning. She didn't need the alarm. Her body woke up at 5:44, 1 minute before the sound, because her body had learned to give itself no mercy. Clara's eyes opened in the darkness of the apartment she shared with Lily, that small 2-bedroom with walls the color of institutional gray and a smell like mold and old coffee that she could never quite wash out no matter how much bleach she used. Lily was asleep in her own room, in her own bed, under the yellow comforter with ducks on it that Clara had bought 2 years ago when she still believed that happy objects could make a child feel safe. The ducks were faded now. One duck's eye had come loose. But Lily loved those ducks, so Clara kept buying the needle and thread and sewing the loose pieces back together. She went to work at Rose's Diner on Powell Street, where the coffee was thin and the tips were thinner, and where the breakfast rush meant she stood for 7 hours straight, her feet swelling in shoes that had cost $6 at a clearance bin, her hands moving in the practiced rhythm of someone who had served 30,000 cups of coffee and received gratitude in perhaps 300 of them. That particular Wednesday, she had made $43 in tips. $43 in 7 hours of work. Broken down, that was $6 per hour, which was less than the minimum wage but somehow still felt like a blessing because in this diner, tips were never guaranteed. She needed to pay rent by Friday. The rent was $850. She had $112 in her bank account. The realization of this mathematics, the absolute clarity of her own mathematics, was a blade through her chest every single morning. But that Wednesday, something worse happened. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a man walked into the diner wearing a suit that cost more than Clara would ever own, and with him came Marco Santos, who was a lawyer for people like Marcus Webb, the kind of lawyer who had learned to make the law bend like clay in his hands. "Clara Hartley?" the suit asked. She knew before he said the words. Her body knew. Her hands knew. The cup she was holding knew, because it slipped from her fingers and shattered on the tile floor. "You are being served notice of custody proceedings," he said, and he laid papers on the counter, and she read the numbers, and she felt the world stop rotating. $47,000. Court costs. Psychological evaluation costs. All due within 10 days. Within 10 days, all Lily would be given to Marcus. The apartment was so small that Clara could hear Lily breathing from the kitchen. She stood at the sink, water running cold over her hands, staring at the number on her phone screen. $2,847. That was the sum of 8 years of labor, of skipped meals, of overtime shifts that bent her spine and cracked her fingers. $2,847 between her daughter and nothing. The water turned her skin red. She did not turn it off. $47,000. 10 days. The papers sat on the kitchen table, their edges sharp as knives, and she had read them 17 times because she kept hoping the numbers would change, would soften, would somehow become survivable. But paper does not lie. Paper is honest in a way people never are. "Mommy? Are you crying?" Lily stood in the doorway of their bedroom, small and serious in her threadbare pajamas, her dark hair tangled from sleep. She was 5 years old and already she could read sadness the way other children read picture books. Clara's hands shook as she turned off the water. "No, baby. Just cold hands," she said, and she smiled, and the smile was a lie, but it was a lie made of love, so it was almost true. Lily came forward and pressed her small hands against Clara's palms. Warm. Safe. Everything that was not safe at all. "We are going to be okay," Clara whispered, and she held her daughter against her chest, and over Lily's shoulder, through the window, she could see the San Francisco skyline burning orange in the failing light. Gold buildings that belonged to people who never counted their money. People like Marcus Webb. 2 days earlier, he had come to her apartment at 6 o'clock in the evening. She had opened the door thinking it was the neighbor returning Lily, and instead there was Marcus, tall and beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. His watch alone cost more than her monthly rent. Police Academy ring on his left hand. The ring of a man who knew people. The ring of a man who could make things happen. "Clara," he said, and he smiled, and his smile was a blade wrapped in ice. "We need to talk about our daughter." She had not let him inside. She had blocked the doorway with her body, small as it was, and he had only laughed. That laugh was the worst part, not anger, not violence, but amusement. As if she were a child who did not understand the game being played. "I filed custody papers," he said, his voice smooth and practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Your psychological evaluations, my legal costs, back childcare support you owe me." The judge assigned a figure. $47,000. "I never agreed to that," she had said, her voice thin as paper. "You agreed the moment you tried to keep me from her," Marcus replied. "And Clara, I talked to Judge Patterson myself. He is a reasonable man. He understands that some people simply cannot afford to raise children properly. Without that money, the court will place Lily in my custody. I have already prepared her room." The words landed like stones in still water. Each one sinking. Each one creating rings that spread outward and never stopped. "You cannot do this," she had whispered. "I already have," he said. He leaned against the doorframe, utterly at ease. "I know 3 sergeants at the precinct. Your restraining order requests keep getting lost in the system. It is remarkable how many documents can go missing when the right person wants them to. He reached out and touched her cheek with one finger. She flinched. 10 days, Clara. 10 days or Lily comes home with me. She had slammed the door. She had locked it. She had slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with her forehead against her knees, and she did not cry because there was no point in crying when the mathematics were so absolute. $47,000 did not exist in her world. It existed in the world of men like Marcus Webb. It existed in marble buildings and designer watches and police captains who answered phones that she would never own. It had existed in the world of the Moretti mansion, where she had worked since Lily was born. The mansion sat on Pacific Heights like a fortress, all pale stone and black windows, surrounded by gates that looked as though they had been designed to keep out an invading army. Clara had cleaned 17 rooms in that house. 17 rooms larger than her entire apartment. The marble floors alone could have fed her and Lily for 3 years. She worked 4 days a week, Wednesday through Saturday, from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. 9 hours of her life in exchange for $15 an hour, which came to $135 per day, which came to $540 per week, which came to $2,160 per month. After rent, food, utilities, and bus fare, she had maybe $300 left. Maybe. On good weeks. That Wednesday morning, the morning the papers arrived, she had woken at 5:30 in the dark and listened to Lily sleeping, her breath making small sounds in the silence. She had packed 2 lunches, one for Lily at the neighbor's house, one for herself at the diner. The lunches were identical because she bought from the discount bin at the grocery store, for crackers, 2 slices of processed cheese, an apple that had been slightly bruised. She had divided the bruised apple in half. The bus ride to the mansion took 45 minutes. She stood the entire way because standing was cheaper than sitting in the seat that cost extra. The other passengers never looked at her. Invisibility was a coat she wore, something she had learned to wrap around herself years ago. She was a woman in a grey sweater, a woman carrying a canvas bag, a woman who meant nothing to anyone. The mansion's back entrance was where the staff entered. Not guests. Not family. Just the people who made the place function, who disappeared into the walls and out of memory the moment they left. The head housekeeper, a woman named Diane who had supervised this place for 12 years, nodded at Clara without really seeing her. The library. It has not been cleaned in 5 days. Mr. Moretti used it yesterday. He left it, complicated, Diane said. Clara moved through the hallway with practiced silence. The Moretti mansion was not a home. It was a museum of expensive things. Paintings that cost more than buildings. Sculptures that had their own insurance policies. Marble that had been quarried from mountains in Italy and shipped across oceans. Every surface announced that someone had more money than most people would earn in a lifetime. The library smelled like cigars and leather and something else, something like the very air inside was more valuable than outside. A glass had been overturned on the mahogany desk, whiskey pooling across papers. Books lay scattered on the floor as if thrown. On the windowsill, a framed photograph of a young girl. Maybe 7 years old. Dark eyes. Dante Moretti's eyes. Clara did not allow herself to wonder what had happened in this room. She simply cleaned. She picked up the books and returned them to their shelves in alphabetical order, as they had been. She wiped the whiskey from the desk with a cloth that cost more than her entire wardrobe. She picked up the framed photograph carefully. The girl was smiling. That was the detail that struck her. Despite Dante Moretti's reputation, despite the empire that carried his name, despite everything she had heard the kitchen staff whisper about a man who commanded absolute loyalty and tolerated no weakness, his daughter had been smiling in this photograph. She had set the frame back on the windowsill. She had never been given any information about what happened to her. That was how the mansion worked. You saw things. You cleaned around them. You forgot them. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Clara had finished the mansion. She had taken the bus to the diner where she worked Wednesday nights, waiting tables for 7 hours in a uniform that had been white once, pulling it on over the exhaustion that lived in her bones now. The tips were thinner on Wednesdays, and her feet swelled against shoes that had cost $6, and she moved in the practiced rhythm of someone who had served 30,000 cups of coffee and received gratitude in perhaps 300 of them. $43 in tips that Wednesday. $6 per hour. She had counted the bills 3 times, her hands shaking. Then the man in the suit had walked in. Then Marco Santos, the lawyer. Then the papers on the counter. Then the numbers that changed everything. $47,000. She had $112 in her bank account. The equation was written in a language she understood perfectly, and it was the language of loss. That night, after work, after the bus ride home, after checking on Lily sleeping in the neighbor's apartment, Clara had climbed the stairs to her building. The hallway smelled like other people's dinners and other people's lives. She had opened her apartment door to find Lily's drawing on the table, colored in crayons. A family of 3 standing under a sun with a smiling face. 2 tall figures. 1 small one. The small figure was labeled in Lily's careful printing, M.E. Clara had held that drawing against her chest, and she had finally let herself break. She sat on the edge of their bed, in the dark, holding her daughter's art, and she understood what it meant to have nothing and to be nothing and to know that in 10 days, even that nothing would be taken from her. What happened next would come from a place she never expected. What changed everything was a sound, footsteps in a corridor beneath a building she had never entered, a moment of violence interrupted, a shadow moving in darkness. But that was still 3 days away. For now, Clara sat in the dark with a drawing of her family, and she held onto it like a prayer that no one would answer. The humid August night swallowed the underground room whole. Concrete walls wept condensation. The bass from the poker tables above thudded through the floor like a dying heartbeat. Clara Hartley stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes adjusting to the harsh fluorescent light, her breath coming in shallow pools. Before her, 3 men in black suits with gold chains catching the glare, their shoulders broad enough to block doorways, their hands resting on the felt tables with the casual confidence of people who had never been told no. And in the corner, pressed against the wall like a trapped animal, Mrs. Chen. The elderly Chinese woman's wrist was twisted backward by a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. His smile was a blade. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to climb those stairs, to forget she had ever heard Mrs. Chen's trembling voice at her apartment door 2 hours ago. But she did not move. "My nephew owed money," Mrs. Chen had whispered, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. "One time I translated for him at the gambling hall. One time. Now they say I owe $12,000. They say if I do not pay, they take my restaurant. They take my life." Clara had sat down slowly. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. That I never gambled. That I only translated words." Mrs. Chen's eyes were hollow. "They did not believe me. They said I have 5 days. 5 days." Clara was running out of 10 days to save $47,000 she did not have. She understood the mathematics of desperation better than most people understood breathing. Mrs. Chen had watched Lily for free for 2 years when Clara had nothing but a waitress uniform and a prayer that never came answered. She had fed Clara's daughter soup made from chicken bones. She had braided Lily's hair on school mornings when Clara was working double shifts. She had loved a child that was not hers. So Clara had borrowed a jacket from her neighbor, told Lily to stay with Mrs. Kim down the hall, and walked into the humid August night toward the Moretti building. Now she stood at the bottom of these stairs, and she understood that she was about to do something that could destroy her. "You do not owe them anything," Clara said. Her voice cracked like ice under pressure. "And you know it." The 3 men turned. The one holding Mrs. Chen's wrist laughed. It was a sound like glass breaking. "You should leave," he said. "Before we decide to keep you too." Clara's legs trembled. Her mouth was dry. But she stepped forward anyway, just 1 step, just enough to position herself between the men and the old woman who had shown her kindness when kindness was a luxury. Let her go. The man released Mrs. Chen's wrist and reached for Clara instead. His hand was large enough to cover her entire face. His fingers smelled like cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Then everything stopped. The voice came from the shadows at the far end of the room, quiet and absolute, like a word carved into stone. Stop. Every person froze. The poker players looked up from their cards. The guards at the door straightened. Even the man with his hand extended toward Clara's throat lowered his arm slowly, as if he was taking instructions from a puppeteer he could not see. Dante Moretti stepped into the harsh light. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with shoulders broad enough that he seemed to fill the entire room even though the room was enormous. His suit was black silk that cost more than Clara's annual salary. A white shirt open at the throat revealed a chest scarred and mapped like a territory of pain. His hair was dark, silvered slightly at the temples, swept back from a face that looked carved from something harder than bone. But it was his eyes that stopped the world, storm gray, penetrating, the eyes of a man who had seen things that broke normal people and had simply chosen not to break. He was flanked by two younger men, Carlo, his lieutenant, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, and Franco, broader, with hands that looked capable of crushing stone. Dante's gaze moved across the room, across the three men with their hands slowly falling to their sides, and then it landed on Clara. He looked at her like someone might look at a painting that had just moved. Like something he thought was dead had suddenly opened its eyes. "Let them go," he said. No one moved. Carlo stepped forward. Franco blocked the exit. The three men released Mrs. Chen without protest, backing away like animals retreating from a predator. Clara helped the old woman to her feet. Mrs. Chen's hands were shaking so badly that Clara had to grip her arm to keep her upright. "Go," Dante said, but not to them. He was still looking at Clara. "Both of you. Now." They climbed the stairs. Clara did not look back. Her mind was a white room with nothing in it but the sound of her heartbeat and the weight of Dante Moretti's gaze burning into her back like a brand. 20 hours later, Clara returned to her apartment building to find fire trucks blocking the street. The smoke rose in thick columns against the midnight sky, orange and black like something being erased. Her building. Her apartment. 3rd floor. She knew it before anyone told her. She could smell it, not just smoke, but something deeper, something chemical, something wrong. The firefighters would not let her pass the yellow tape. One of them, a woman with gray in her hair and exhaustion in her face, caught Clara's arm gently. "Is that your building?" "My daughter." "My daughter was supposed to stay with Mrs. Kim downstairs but—" "Your daughter is fine," the firefighter said. "She's with a neighbor 2 buildings down." "But you can't go up there. The fire started on your floor. We're calling it suspicious origin." The world tilted. Clara's vision narrowed to a single point. Her apartment. Everything they owned. Lily's clothes. School supplies. The photographs of Lily as a baby. The coffee can hidden under the floorboards with $4,700 she had saved over 8 years of double shifts and eating yesterday's food from garbage cans. Gone. She found Lily sitting on a neighbor's front step, wrapped in a blanket that belonged to someone else, her small face streaked with soot and tears. She was holding a single piece of paper. Crayon still clutched in her tiny fist. The drawing. The family of 3 standing under a smiling sun. The edges were singed. The colors had faded. Clara picked up her daughter and held her. Lily's body was shaking like she was made of wind. "We go back in?" Lily asked, her voice very small. "Get our things?" "No," Clara whispered. "No, baby. We stay out here for now." The firefighters cleared the scene slowly. The neighbors retreated to their apartments. The August humidity pressed down on everything like a weight trying to suffocate the world. Clara sat on the curb, Lily asleep against her shoulder, the drawing clenched in her other hand. The edges that weren't burning smelled like something chemical and wrong. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. At 3:22 in the morning, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The car was the kind that cost more than entire buildings. The kind that stopped conversation. The driver's window lowered, and Clara saw Carlo in the passenger seat. He got out slowly, his movements deliberate and careful, the way you move around something wild that might break. But it was not Carlo who walked toward her. Dante Moretti moved through the humid night like something inevitable. He was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than the apartment that had just burned down. His hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes carrying the weight of something that had kept him awake. He crouched down in front of Clara, bringing himself to her eye level, his expensive shoes touching the concrete where her worn sneakers had left prints in the ash. "You stood up for someone last night," he said. His voice was quiet. "Now you are sitting in ashes." "Why?" Clara looked at him with eyes that had no tears left in them. She was exhausted past the point of fear. She had lost her apartment, her possessions, her careful savings, her future. She had $2 in her pocket. No phone. No place to go except a series of shelters that were full in August when the homeless population doubled. Because sometimes standing up is all you have left, she heard herself say, even when you know it will cost you everything. Dante was still for a long moment. His eyes moved to Lily's sleeping face, and something in him seemed to crack like ice in spring. He had a daughter once. Elena. 4 years old, never born, a weight he carried in a locked nursery that he never entered and never dismantled. He stood, his joints moving with the care of someone who carried heavy things. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" Clara asked. "To my house. You need a place to stay. I need someone I can trust around my home. You keep cleaning. You and your daughter take the east guest wing." Clara should have refused. Every instinct that had kept her alive told her that this was dangerous, that men like Dante Moretti did not help women like her without expecting something in return. But Lily was shivering. The thermometer had dropped to 58 degrees. They had $2. She nodded. The mansion in Pacific Heights was like stepping into a different country. The foyer alone was larger than her entire apartment building. Marble floors reflected light from chandeliers that looked like captured stars. Franco showed them to the east guest wing, 2 rooms connected by a shared bathroom, with furniture so fine that Clara was afraid to sit on it. Lily woke as they entered the bedroom. She stood in the center of the space, looking around with eyes wide enough to contain the whole world. "Mama," she whispered. "Are we in a castle?" Clara knelt down and held her daughter while she shook, while she cried for everything they had lost, while the drawing of their family hung from Clara's pocket like a promise that something of them still existed. The next morning, Sophie Langford arrived. She was dressed in white, a designer suit that probably cost more than Clara made in a month, with dark hair swept into a knot so tight it looked painful. Her heels were silver, her nails were blood red, and her eyes were the color of something frozen. She moved through the mansion like she owned it, because in a way, she did. Half owner of Dante's legitimate enterprises. Silent partner. The woman who had been waiting 3 years for Dante to notice her, to marry her, to build an empire with her. Clara was cleaning the hallway when Sophie passed, and she heard the woman's heels stop. Heard the intake of breath that meant recognition and assessment and judgment all at once. 20 minutes later, Sophie was in Dante's office with the door closed. But the door was old, and the vent system ran through the walls, and Clara could hear every word. "You brought a maid and her child to live here." Sophie's voice was sharp, polished, like a blade honed to a fine point. "She needed help," Dante replied. His tone was flat, guarded. "You have not let anyone close since Elena died." Sophie's words were careful, deliberate. "This woman is a threat. She is nobody. A cleaning woman with a bastard child. She will ruin you." Dante was silent. Clara could feel his silence through the vent like a physical thing. "She is just temporary," he said finally. But something in his tone was unconvincing. Sophie left the office, and Clara heard her heels clicking down the hallway, sharp, precise, like a countdown to something terrible. The woman was planning something. Clara could feel it the way you can feel a storm approaching before the sky changes color. That afternoon, Marcus Webb appeared at the gates. He was tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of face that would be handsome if it was not twisted with entitlement. His suit was expensive but not elegant. His smile was the smile of a man who had never been told no and had decided that the world owed him everything. The guard stopped him at the gate, but he shouted Clara's name loud enough that half the neighborhood could hear it. Carlo alerted Dante. Dante walked out to meet him, moving like a man walking toward an appointment with something unpleasant but necessary. "I am here for my daughter," Marcus said. He was holding a stack of papers. "I have custody papers being filed. The mother owes me $47,000 in documented childcare costs. It is in the filing." Dante looked at the papers without touching them. "You are Marcus Webb," he said quietly. 2 domestic violence complaints, both disappeared. 1 restraining order request, denied. You know a sergeant named Morrison. He has made certain documents vanish for you." Marcus's face flushed. "I do not know what you are talking about." "You are going to leave now," Dante interrupted. His voice was soft, but something in it made Marcus step backward. "And you are not going to return. And you are never going to contact Clara Hartley or your daughter again. If you do, certain people will learn about Morrison and certain financial arrangements. Do you understand me?" Marcus understood. He left, but his eyes promised this was not over. Inside, Dante found Clara in the dining room. Lily was at the kitchen table with crayons and paper, drawing horses with improbable wings. Dante waited until she was absorbed before speaking. "Tell me everything," he said. Clara told him. The $47,000. The 10 days that were now down to 7. The fabricated childcare costs that Marcus had filed but could never prove, but that he had police connections to make stick anyway. The restraining order she tried to file but could not afford a lawyer to defend against his counterclaim. "I am nobody," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I clean houses. I work double shifts. Why would you help me?" Dante sat down slowly. 8 years ago, I lost my daughter, he said. Elena. She was 4. My wife was pregnant, and a car accident took her. Took the baby. I built her a nursery and I never dismantled it. I locked the door, and I never said her name out loud again until now. When I see your daughter, I see what I lost. When I see you fighting alone, I see the fight I gave up. He stood. You need $47,000. I will pay it. Clara recoiled. I cannot accept. It is not charity, Dante said. You will work for me. Officially. Household manager. Salary position. The first payment covers your debt. Lily ran into the room, her drawing forgotten. Are you the castle king? She asked. In 15 years of working for Dante Moretti, Carlo and Franco had never seen him smile. But something moved in the corner of his mouth. Something that looked almost like life returning to a place that had been dead. Perhaps I am, he said quietly. What happened next would set in motion events that no one could have predicted. Sophie Langford was already making phone calls to ensure Clara would be destroyed publicly. Marcus Webb was meeting with his police contacts to arrange something far worse than a custody hearing. And Dante Moretti had just made a decision that would either save him or destroy him completely. The storm was coming. The rain came down in sheets that August night, fat drops that hammered against the mansion windows like fists demanding entry. Clara stood in the garden behind the Moretti estate, soaked through her borrowed dress, her body trembling not from cold but from the weight of what she had seen on every screen in the city that morning. Her face. Lily's face. The headline burning across tabloid news, maid seduces Mafia kingpin. Gold digger uses child to trap crime boss. The words were lies wrapped in venom, but lies repeated 10 million times become their own kind of truth. She held the drawing Lily had made, their family, the three of them standing together under a sun that Lily had colored yellow, so yellow it looked like hope, and the rain was destroying it, the pencil marks bleeding into each other, the sun dissolving into watercolor chaos. Thunder cracked overhead like the world breaking open. Clara's hand shook as she pressed the drawing against her chest. The lamination Dante's staff had added to preserve it crinkled under her trembling fingers. Maybe Lily would be safer without her. The thought came like poison. Maybe if she disappeared, if she sent her daughter away, gave Marcus what he wanted just to make it stop. Gave Sophie what she wanted. Let the world believe their version of her story. She was so tired. So completely, utterly exhausted from fighting, from standing, from refusing to break. The drawing was dissolving. Everything was dissolving. Her knees nearly buckled as she sank onto the wet stone bench. The rain plastered her hair to her skull, ran into her eyes, soaked through every layer of borrowed fabric. She had worn borrowed clothes for so long she barely remembered what her own things felt like. And now even those memories were being rewritten by people who had never met her, never looked into her eyes, never heard her say a single word. Then Lily's voice cut through the thunder. "Mama, you are getting wet." Clara's head snapped up. In the doorway of the mansion, backlit by the warm glow of the entrance, stood her daughter in a nightgown, her hand held firmly by Dante Moretti. The Mafia boss stood motionless, watching Clara with an intensity that made the rain seem to pause between earth and sky. Lily did not wait for an answer. She released Dante's hand and ran through the downpour, her small feet splashing through puddles, her nightgown soaked in an instant. She crashed into Clara's arms with the force of her entire 4-year-old body, and the impact was enough to break something open inside her mother that had been sealed shut since the moment she saw those headlines. "I love you, Mama," Lily said simply, the way children state facts that adults spend decades trying to understand. "I love you and you are cold." Clara held her daughter, rain pouring down, the drawing forgotten on the stone bench, dissolving into nothing. She pressed her face into Lily's wet hair and felt her own tears mix with the rain, indistinguishable, no longer hers alone. Dante watched them from the doorway. In 15 years of working for him, Carlo and Franco had never seen his face show what it showed in that moment. Something had shifted behind his eyes. Some calculation had been made. Some line had been crossed that he knew, with absolute certainty, could never be uncrossed. He made 2 phone calls that night. The first was to his contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man named Caldwell who had been waiting for years for evidence exactly like what Dante now offered. "I have recordings," Dante said, his voice solid as concrete. "Police corruption. Racketeering. Witness intimidation. Sergeant Morrison and Marcus Webb. Everything you need to build a case that sticks." The second phone call was to his media team. "Live press conference," he said. "Tomorrow morning. Every station. Every camera. I want the world watching." By 4 in the morning, before the sun could even think about rising, FBI agents were moving through the pre-dawn darkness in San Francisco, black vans pulling up to addresses that would change everything. Marcus Webb answered his apartment door in a stained t-shirt, his face bloated with sleep and too many drinks the night before. The moment he saw the badges, the moment he understood what was happening, the color drained from his face like water from a sink. "Step outside," the lead agent said. Marcus tried to run. 3 steps. That was all he managed before his body slammed against the wall hard enough to crack plaster, his arms wrenched behind his back, cuffs biting into his wrists. He gasped for breath like a fish thrown onto dry land. "I have connections," he said, his voice cracking into something desperate and small. "I know people. You cannot do this. You do not understand who I am." The agent leaned close. "Your connections are in the next van. We arrested Sergeant Morrison 20 minutes ago. And we have recordings of every bribe, every fabricated document, every threat you made to that woman and her child. You are finished." Marcus's legs gave out. They dragged him to the car, his feet scraping against concrete, his mouth open in a silent scream. News cameras caught everything: his arrest, his desperation, his complete and total collapse, and within 1 hour, 847,000 people had watched the video online. By dawn, it was 3 million. By the time Dante took the podium for his press conference at noon, every news outlet in the country had run the footage. Sophie Langford watched from her penthouse overlooking the bay, a penthouse that cost more than Clara would earn in 50 lifetimes. She stood at the window with a glass of champagne in one hand and the remote control in the other, her face perfectly composed, perfectly still, like a woman frozen mid-breath. Dante appeared on screen. Behind him, a digital display showed emails, text messages, bank transfers, evidence of every lie Sophie had paid for, every tabloid reporter she had seduced with money, every false story she had planted to destroy an innocent woman and her child. Sophie Langford, Dante said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment, leaked false information to the media with the deliberate intent to harm Clara Hartley and her daughter. Here is the evidence. The screen filled with her own words. Her own handwriting. Her own voice on recorded calls: "I do not care if it is true. I care if it destroys her." Sophie's hands tightened on the remote until her knuckles turned white. The glass of champagne slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, spreading like blood. Her phone began ringing. Investors pulling their money. Board members resigning. Charities removing her name from their letterhead. Society pages that had celebrated her for decades suddenly went silent, the way cities go silent after a bomb has fallen. Dante continued, "Clara Hartley is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her or her daughter will answer directly to me. Let that be understood. Let that be absolutely clear." The camera cut to his face. His eyes were dark as a winter sky. His scar seemed to deepen in the harsh studio lighting. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow the entire country heard it. "I have spent 15 years building an empire in darkness. I have forgotten who I was before the money, before the fear, before the power. But in the last 4 days, I have remembered. And what I remembered is that some things are worth more than empires. Some people are worth everything." Within 4 hours, Marcus Webb was being transported to federal holding. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to charge him with 10 separate crimes. His bail was denied. The judge looked at the recordings, listened to his voice threatening Clara, and set his sentence recommendation at 40 years minimum. Sophie Langford's empire took longer to crumble, but it crumbled nonetheless, piece by piece, like a building being demolished from the inside out. Her business partners sued her. Her investors sued her. 3 separate women came forward with stories of her cruelty, her manipulation, her vicious streak that had been hidden beneath designer dresses and charitable galas. Within 1 week, she was no longer invited anywhere. Within 2 weeks, her bank accounts were being frozen pending multiple lawsuits. Within 1 month, she had moved to New York, trying to escape the wreckage of her life. But there was no escape. The internet had recorded everything. The internet never forgets. Justice, when it finally arrived, came not as mercy but as reckoning. Not as forgiveness but as systematic, total, and absolute destruction of everyone who had harmed Clara Hartley. And she knew nothing of it yet, sitting in the mansion library holding her daughter, watching Dante's press conference on a television screen, watching him stand before the world and declare her worth. Watching him, in effect, declare war on everyone who had ever tried to diminish her. Lily squeezed her hand and asked a question that Clara would remember for the rest of her life: "Is the Castle King being brave?" Clara could not answer. She could only cry and hold her daughter and understand, for the first time, what it meant to not be alone. 2 weeks after Marcus Webb's arrest, the mansion fell into a different kind of silence. Not the silence of danger, but the silence of healing. Clara stood in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, watching Lily color at the marble table, her small fingers wrapped around a purple crayon. The girl had drawn a house with 4 windows and a door. A stick figure with wild hair labeled Mama stood beside another figure labeled Papa with an impossibly large smile. Clara's throat tightened. She had not slept well since that night on the curb, since Dante found her broken and remade her whole. The nightmares came less frequently now, but they came. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that made guards straighten their spines. Dante appeared in the doorway, still wearing the black t-shirt and sweatpants from early morning. His dark eyes found Clara first, then softened when they landed on Lily. "Good morning, Bella," he said, his voice like gravel soothed with honey. Lily looked up, and something shifted in her small face. The hesitation that had lived there for weeks, the uncertainty of a child learning that the world contained both monsters and protectors, began to fade. She set down her crayon with deliberate care, as if what she was about to do required courage. "Papa." Her voice was small, fragile as glass. "Can I call you Papa?" Dante stopped moving. His coffee cup, halfway to his lips, froze in midair. Behind him, Carlo appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and quietly withdrew, leaving the three of them suspended in a single perfect moment. Lily continued, innocent and unstoppable, because Mama says family is people who take care of you, and you take care of us. Dante set his cup down with exaggerated slowness. His hands that had commanded empires, trembled like those of an old man. He knelt until his eyes were level with Lily's, and when he spoke, his voice had fractured into something barely human. "Yes. You can call me Papa." Lily's face transformed into pure radiance. She threw her arms around his neck, and Dante held her like she was made of starlight that might disappear if he did not hold tight enough. Clara watched her daughter embrace the man who had rebuilt their world, and she could not stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks. That evening, as the sun descended behind the San Francisco skyline in shades of rust and amber, Dante took Clara's hand and led her up the narrow staircase to the third floor. She had seen most of the mansion by then, the library with its leather chairs, the kitchen with its gleaming appliances, the master bedroom with windows overlooking the city, but she had never been to the locked door at the end of the hallway. Dante's hand shook on the doorknob. "I have not opened this room in 8 years," he said quietly. His accent thickened when he was emotional, the Italian vowels rising to the surface like stones from a deep well. "I thought if I never touched anything inside, she would remain real." Clara waited. She did not ask questions. She simply squeezed his hand and waited while he gathered the courage to open a tomb. The door swung inward. The room was small, painted in pale pink, with white furniture and stuffed animals arranged on shelves with museum-level precision. A crib stood against one wall, its mattress undisturbed, its blanket folded with geometric exactness. On the opposite wall, in letters of soft gold, a name was painted, Elena Rose Moretti. Dante did not enter. He stood in the doorway like a man at the edge of a cliff. Clara stepped inside first. She moved slowly, reverently, her eyes taking in the details of a life interrupted. A mobile shaped like stars hung from the ceiling. A soft pink rug covered the wooden floor. On the dresser, a photograph in a silver frame showed a beautiful woman with dark hair and Dante's eyes, holding an infant. "She was your daughter," Clara said. It was not a question. "She was," Dante replied, his voice stripped down to its most essential self. "Elena Rose. She was 3 years old when the cancer took her. I remember thinking that a man with my power, my money, my connections, should be able to buy her a future. But there is no currency in the world that purchases time." Clara turned to him. She crossed the space between them and took both his hands. His palms were warm, but his fingers were ice. "She is real," Clara said. "She is not locked in this room. She lives in you. She lives in the way you protect Lily. She lives in the way you saw us when we were invisible. She lives in the man who would rather build a future than destroy a past." Dante's eyes met hers, and for the first time since his daughter died, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his grief without running from it. He pulled Clara close, and they held each other in that room full of ghosts and starlight. When he kissed her, it was slow and desperate, 8 years of grief meeting a lifetime of survival, two people broken in different ways learning how to become whole. Outside the locked room, Lily whispered to Carlo, who had brought her juice in a small crystal cup. "Are they going to get married?" Carlo, gruff but smiling for the first time in years, replied, "Probably, kid. Probably soon." The city began to change around them in the following weeks. News reports documented Marcus Webb's federal trial, with prosecutors presenting evidence of his corruption, his threats, his systematic abuse. His sentence recommendation exceeded 40 years. Sophie Langford's name appeared in different headlines, lawsuits filed by business partners, allegations from women she had wronged, her charitable foundation under investigation. Within 3 weeks, she had sold her penthouse at a fraction of its value and relocated to New York, but the internet, the relentless collector of sins, did not forget. Clara watched it all from the mansion library. She did not celebrate the destruction of her enemies. Instead, she felt something shift inside her chest, a weight lifting that she had carried so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it pressing against her lungs. Justice had arrived, not as mercy, but as reckoning. 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Clara sat in a courthouse holding Lily's hand while Dante sat beside her, his presence like an anchor. The judge processed the adoption papers with formal precision, her pen moving across documents that would legally bind the three of them into one family. "Ms. Hartley, Mr. Moretti," the judge said, looking over her glasses, "this court recognizes your petition. Effective immediately, Lily Margaret Hartley is legally adopted by Dante Moretti. Congratulations to your family." Lily squealed with joy. She hugged them both with the pure, uncomplicated happiness of a child who had learned that the world, despite its cruelty, could also deliver miracles. Outside the courthouse, the humid August heat that had once felt like suffocation had given way to cool January wind. They walked through San Francisco as a family, no black SUVs trailing behind them, no guards hovering at a distance. Just 3 people moving through the city like anyone else. Dante held Lily on his shoulders while Clara walked beside them, her hand in his, watching her daughter point at the Golden Gate Bridge and shout with delight. Clara had returned to work, but not as a waitress collecting $40 tips from men who would not meet her eyes. She now managed Dante's legitimate property holdings, a career built on her own strength, her own intelligence, her own choices. She had earned it. Not because Dante handed it to her, but because she reached for it and held on. Dante, meanwhile, had quietly stepped back from the operations that required darkness. His legitimate businesses flourished. He opened a foundation in Clara's name dedicated to helping women escaping abusive situations. The mansion's 3rd floor was no longer a sealed tomb. Elena's nursery became Lily's room, with her toys and books and drawings covering the walls, but one photo of Elena remained on the shelf, not locked away but honored, integrated into the living space of a family learning to carry grief alongside joy. As they walked through the park, Lily running ahead with a joy that made her seem to glow from within, Clara spoke words that had been building inside her for months. "I thought strength meant never falling," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I thought it meant standing unbroken, always certain, always sure. But I learned something different. Real strength is not found in never falling. Real strength is found in always standing back up. In choosing to live again when living seems impossible. In trusting someone when trust seems like the most dangerous thing you could do." She looked at Dante, at his profile outlined against the winter sky, and continued, "When you stand up for others, even when you have nothing left to give, even when your own survival is uncertain, the universe sends you someone who will stand up for you." Dante pulled her close, and they walked together toward their daughter and whatever futures awaited them in a world that had finally learned their names. If this story moved your heart, please do not just watch it, act. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe because tomorrow we have another story of courage that will change how you see the world. Leave a comment below and tell us, what would you do if you were given a second chance? Your story matters. Your voice matters. We will see you in the next one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end, and may you find the strength to always stand back up.